Hi, I'm Kevin Eikenberry.
That makes me Wayne Turmel.
And we're the co-authors of the book, The Long Distance Leader, Rules for Remarkable Remote Leadership. And in the writing of this book, one of the things that was important is what's the focus of this video, which is developing long distance leaders. This video will talk about 5 questions that we think you ought to think about as an organization if you're serious about developing your long distance leaders. And the first of those questions is culture. Well, you know you have a culture, right? When you often talk about whether you plan for it or not, you got one, and you either got the one you want or not. And I think it's really important that you stop and think about, do we have the culture that we want? Are we intentional about it? And if we don't, let's understand and be clear about that gap. Because when our folks are at a distance, we're going to create more subcultures, and it's going to get more muddy for us and become a real problem as we're trying to develop leaders because they don't really know where they're trying to lead.
And you know, in the long distance leader, we're really about being practical. So if we're taking a practical approach at culture, culture is simply the way we do things here. Mm-hmm. And so one of the questions that we have to ask ourselves is, what are the expectations of leaders in our organization? Not only on a high level, well, we expect them to be honest and create the vision and do all that, but how often do we expect them to coach? What do we, it's not only the high level aspirational expectations, but the tactical and behavioral expectations of a long distance leader. And when you're creating a culture, you need to take the distance factor into account because you don't have the hallway conversations or the opportunities to coach on the fly by calling someone into your office.
Well, and I think the other thing there is that I think a lot of organizations don't have clear enough expectations of their leaders at that tactical level anyway. And then when they're doing it at a distance, it gets even further skewed. So if you're trying to develop your leaders, you have to be really clear about what it is that you want them to do when they're doing it at a distance, which leads you to the next point.
Yeah, it's funny. The theme that keeps reoccurring in the long distance leader is that it's really not that different from trying to create a culture regularly. You just need to be mindful of the differences. And that's where the third question comes in, which is, have you identified the skill gaps that need to be filled when your leaders are now doing this new form of leadership and management? And some of those are people soft skills. I hate that term, but
the soft skills are the hard things, right? And so the skills of how do I build relationships and how do I build trust and how do I communicate effectively, all of those are harder. Just as 3 examples, all of those are harder at a distance.
And one of the reasons that they're harder is because we're doing it mitigated by technology. So there's the whole technology skills gap. And it's funny, a lot of organizations leave that to IT. IT can train people how to use Platform X. But there are 2 components to technology training. One is, do I know which button to push? Do I know how to start the webcam? Yeah. Do I know how to do that? But there's another component, which is using them skillfully, which is, when do I use that particular tool? Do I have the training to use this effectively? And so there is all the soft skill leadership skills that still need to be supported, and this supporting technology, which also needs to be built in. And so your organization needs to be able to put a plan together
that addresses those additional. So here's just one example that takes in both of those, sort of the technology piece and the soft skills piece. Like, we've been working with leaders for years, and you go to any organization, ask people how their meetings are, and they'll won't always use words that we will share on this camera for how they feel about those meetings, right? And then we talk about, now we got to do the same meeting that we weren't doing very well before, and now we got to use technology to do it. Are you expecting that, expectations, and what are the gaps? And then thinking about that, which leads us to the next part. How are you going to close the gaps?
Well, and in order to close those gaps, there's going to be required support from the entire organization. You need to create a support plan, which is going to incorporate the whole unit. For example, teaching how to run good virtual meetings. There's the meeting facilitation piece of it, And there's the hardware piece. If you don't know how to use the tools, it's really hard to run a good meeting. So the support plan that you put in place really needs to take a holistic approach at what are all the pieces of the work. And that's different in a remote environment than it is one where everybody's in the same place at the same time.
Yeah, so you may have some leadership development activities that go on in your organization, and what we're challenging you to consider is, are you taking into account the nuances and the differences that are required to do that for leaders that now don't have everybody or all around them, but are maybe around the world? And there's one more question. Most of our book and all of this video has been focused on the leader, and yet when we have a long-distance leader, it also means we have a long-distance team. So the last question is, what about the team? Have you thought about how to support the team members, to give them the skills, to give them the resources? Yes, part of this is what the leaders need to do, but there are probably HR policies, and there are processes, and there are tools, and there are skills that those people need as well. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about how we support the folks that are now working from home? See, the thing is, the day you let them go work at home, they were excited. I don't have to commute, bunny slippers, etc. But the reality is, once they get there, they're often like, oh, I don't really know how to make all this work, and I don't know how to communicate more effectively and keep my relationships and build trust and do all the things that I need to do to be successful.
Well, and if we're, this video is for people who are interested in developing leaders at an organizational level, it needs to be consistent. What are we teaching the leaders to do, certainly, but also what are we expecting of the employees, and is that the same message? Right. And so part of your putting together the leadership development plan is making sure that the leaders and the led, I suppose, are on the same page about what's supposed to happen, and then how do we support that?
Well, you know what? So we've given you 5 questions, 5 things to think about. And in this short video, we certainly can't solve all of your problems or even maybe answer all the questions that you might have. So our challenge to you is that hopefully this has been a way to get you started. But if you see you have a gap, we challenge you, we encourage you, we urge you to be thinking about how to think about the needs of the long-distance leader in all of your leadership development efforts.